Hello and welcome to the interview. I'm speaking today with Frederica Jansz. Frederica, thank you for coming on to the program. We spoke 3 years ago.
Yes.
At the time when you had just taken up the reins of the Sunday Leader as editor. I think it was about 2 or 3 months after Lasantha was murdered.
Yes.
In January 2009. Things are very different today.
Oh,
3
yes.
years, 3 years after. But before we get into all of that, Frederica, what was the nature of the paper that you kind of stepped into at the time 3 years ago, just after Lasantha was killed in Attidia?
You see, the paper, I mean, had paid the ultimate price in
Sunday Leader,
the
yeah.
Sunday Leader,
Yeah.
you know, in having lost its founder editor the way it did. The entire staff were in total disarray. And in fact, there were predictions that the paper would not continue, it would just fold.
Yeah.
So when Lal approached me and asked me,
Lal being Lasantha's brother.
his brother and
Yeah.
chairman and owner of the paper, Wickrematunge, and asked me whether I would come in as editor. It took me a long time. Because at the time I had my own publishing company and was publishing my own news and current affairs magazine, Montage. And I had an investor in there who I had to consult, who made it very clear to me that if I joined the Sunday Leader, he would pull out, which he did do when I finally made my decision 3 weeks later. So yes, so when I walked in, I mean, it was a tough call. I had to sit in the chair of a man who had just been assassinated and pull together a staff who was still very emotional, extremely emotional, build that, you know, that whole team effort, I mean, unity, and also I think my biggest challenge was actually convincing them that that Lasantha was never going to come back, obviously, and we had to move forward because, you know, they revered Lasantha. He was God to them. And then there was I, who was anything but. And quite often, Sanjana, I mean, repeatedly, I used to question my conscience in accepting that decision because repeatedly I felt an imposter in that seat. And I'm saying this in the context that I used to think that perhaps Lasantha may have wanted his wife Sonali to have actually taken over. So I repeatedly questioned myself, except that Sonali had resigned by that time and left the country, saying that her life was seriously under threat. I did try, Sonali and I were in contact, and then I was very keen that she continue writing for the newspaper. At first she told me she was not ready, but then subsequently she did agree to writing a column, which unfortunately by that time, you know, the newspaper was also facing huge financial constraints and difficulties. And quite honestly, Lal told me that he couldn't afford to pay Sonali for that column. I repeatedly kept telling Lal, you know, the perfect combination would have been if we could have got Sonali back and worked together. I think we would have made a formidable team.
But the financial woes wouldn't have gone away by
the financial woes would not have gone away, no. I was only speaking from an editorial point.
Perspective, Yes. Is the question then, Frederica, I mean, with the hindsight of 3 years and all of what the paper has been through in those 3 years, not just with editorial content, as you know, you've been through several court cases, high-profile ones at that, and all of what has gone in print, the economics of running the paper, in hindsight, do you feel that, you know, it's always a question in Sri Lanka whether ownership and keeping a paper afloat wins over the kind of content you are able to print and publish?
Well, this is what Lal keeps telling me, that he gave us journalists complete editorial freedoms, which he said very few owners would have done. And he's absolutely right there. This was a policy, an agreement that he and Lasantha had when they began the paper in 1994. He never interfered with editorial content. And he actually respected and upheld that decision even after I took over. As a result, he says he paid a huge price from an economic point of view, perspective. You see that he lost out on advertising because he gave us those freedoms to practice independent journalism, for which he paid a price financially.
But you are basically then agreeing with the submission that it's incompatible, that in this country the economics would always win over, in a sense, from editorial freedom. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's what I'm saying. Yes, clearly. I mean, the Sunday Leaders and its Sinhala sister newspaper, the Rasa, are classic examples of that.
Do you feel betrayed now, given all of what you have in the past 3 years, where you are today?
I do. There is a sense of betrayal, yes, which I mean was overwhelming at the time all of this happened, because it is I who first approached Asanga Seniviratne, certainly not to come in as a sole investor.
That was for IPO at the time.
It was to raise an IPO,
yeah.
which 1.5 years into negotiations I was told would not be possible. And then there was talk of a private placement of X number of investors, which was also all right. But then that too didn't materialize. And it finally evolved that he came in as the sole investor, something actually which I was very much against, because I felt that would be suicidal for the newspaper.